Love and Loss has been up now for about 2 or 3 weeks, I should think. We've had the show on, and as Mark said in his introduction, it's had a, quite a mixed response, and I'm quite pleased with how it's going. It seemed like a good point midway to just kind of touch base with the show again myself, really, and look at what was here and kind of frame it in a presentation that would help people access the show more. But as I've said in the statements here, really, the exhibition is about connections. It's about our connections in our lives that have shaped our understanding of love and the complex emotions that arise out of that. Certainly those emotions that come out of past experiences. So that it was very much a show about reflecting on my past experiences and putting together something that communicated quite universal themes. I looked at specifically the power of passion, the destructive influence and control, and the shared intimacy of tenderness. And the artefacts that are in the show, especially in the cabinets and things that we'll talk about later on, chairs and stuff, are all about kind of referencing first love, controlled love, and unconditional love. And they become kind of testaments to those things that we experience, really. So each of the objects has been really carefully chosen to show, as I say, first love, conditional love, and controlled love. Finally, the last bit of the slide. Throughout Love and Loss, I'm asking you to come in and evaluate fragments of destroyed paintings, items of clothing, delicate portraits and drawings on the walls, and trying to consider them in your own lives and how they're shared elements of our condition, really. And that's on the website, and that really kind of was my entry point into why I wanted to put this show together, which is why I thought it was prudent to include it. Once I decided what kind of show I wanted to put together in here, I thought, how do I do it? As a portrait painter, do I put a load of portraits in and do a show about painting? Do I do lots of drawings? But I thought, actually, the way I wanted the viewer to engage with the show, I wanted something much more active than putting a portrait on a wall and having the relationship where the viewer passively looks at a picture on a wall at a certain eye line. So first, straight away, I thought, well, I need to have something that's more interactive, and I started thinking about kind of an installation approach to putting this show together. And I came across this great quote by one of the kind of godfathers of installation, Ilya Kabakov, and it said, the main actor in the installation, the main centre towards which everything is directed, for which everything is intended, is the viewer. Only his reaction is anticipated. And for me, that was massively important. But straight away, I thought, yeah, I want people to come in, and the show is about them. I'm using references from my life, but it's actually about your life and how you react to it. And I quite like this idea of the actor, because for me, when I look at installation art and when I enjoy installation art, there's a sense of theatre about it. There's a sense of the performative. And I wanted people to come in and get a sense of that when you were in the room of a stage set, the kind of play, and we become actors. So that was my initial start point coming into putting the show together. The aspects around installation really are looking at this sense of a habitation of a physical site. When you come into an installation, they're very physical. They belong in a space. And that was really important in terms of getting people in here and getting people around a bed, for example. But also it's about its connections to real conditions. And what I mean by that is, the conditions that installation arts connect with are often social. There's often social reasons why installations work, or they're often bridging traditional boundaries in art. They can be often referenced in historical work, and one of the artists we're going to look at a little bit later deals with being a Cuban in it. For me to fully understand installation art, and I've done installation art three times in my kind of art career. I did it when I first started off as a graduate. My graduate show was in installation, and then I did it again in Manchester before I moved up here, and then I had a small one here when I first came to the Palace Arts, and I had an installation which was a deep sea adventure, and you could go in and see a painting, and it was all lights and sound and seaweed. But I thought, I need a little bit more about installation art because I need this show to work on lots of different levels, and I need it to really kind of have some substance. So I went right back to these kind of early 20th century avant-garde kind of precursors to installation art. And I was looking specifically at the Paris exhibition of 38 and Kurt Schwitter's. Now, the Paris exhibition in 38 was this really interesting show that the surrealists threw together, which was really about distancing themselves from the aesthetic conventions at the time and finding different ways to present their work. So you can see in this image from the installation, you've got a bed there, this kind of Louis XV bed. There was a pool of water that Dali put in there, which was a mirror. all of these plants, and there was smell of coffee in the show, and there was all these things hanging down, and it really challenged viewers' understanding of how art can be presented. And I thought, well, I'm not going to go as extreme or as immersive as that, but actually I like this idea of decentering art and taking it away from the eye line and making viewers think, actually, why is there some clothing on the floor? What does that mean? That then led me to look at Kurt Schwitter's, and specifically this piece that he did in his own home in Hanover, which was called Merzbau, and it's a really important piece because, again, it's a precursor to installation art. He was looking at representing his friends and the people he knew in their relationships in this massive installation. When he went to this installation, he took people around guided tours, and the guided tours took 4 hours. So they were quite an ordeal for people to go and see them. And that's because he was showing people locks of hair that belonged to a person and giving them the whole backstory about it. Nail clippings were included in this, dried flowers. And it was this utterly immersive experience, but moving away from craft and thinking about using objects and looking at the symbolic status of the objects and the materials that he presented. And again, for me, thinking about putting this show together, this idea of the installation and using objects symbolically was the driver. All right? So I'm there at the moment. But obviously, I needed to move it on and find a way that I wasn't just creating a derivative pastiche of the themes that were coming up in surrealism and thinking, how do I approach putting this together? So I thought, well, there's two possible approaches to this. One is I create a space that exists for the viewer to activate as an engaged and absorbed participant. Do I want people to jump in the bed? Possibly not. But how active am I going to take this? Or do I take a more illustrative view and present the work in more of a situational context and gear it towards the viewers firsthand? And I found myself toying as I was looking through kind of books and thinking about work I'd seen in the past. I want a blend of them both, really. I want to have a situation where people come in and there is, your experience is important, but also there was an element of connecting with the objects that are in the installation. So to get to a point where that would work satisfactorily in this space, again, I went back to art history and I looked at Claes Oldenburg. Now, we've got a Claes Oldenburg in Middlesbrough, the really famously bottle of notes that you always see little kids running up and down. But it's funny because I was in Minneapolis doing some painting a year or so ago, and there's a really famous cherry and spoon in there as well. And all of these kind of synchronistic connections kept happening, and I thought, right, this is a really interesting way to approach it. And I hadn't seen his bedroom ensemble of 1963, where he is kind of put together this. It almost looked like a department store, and he had a bed and had all of these objects about really the sense of place and having objects as a space that people would identify with and recognise. But what he did purposefully was he cordoned it off with a piece of string. And I quite liked that idea of having an area that was inaccessible to the view. And it reminded me of these kind of exhibitions you go to where they kind of put Lowry's workshop together and you have this little viewing platform and you look in and you're seeing all of these objects. But then I thought, well, actually, no, I want something that people can walk into. So I developed that a little bit further and I started looking at Lucas Samaras and his room of 1964, which was actually a direct challenge to Claes Oldenburg in the sense of it being inaccessible. And what he did was he wanted to create, this is a reproduction of his own bedroom, and he wanted to create an environment that was fully immersive, that the actual participant went into, was completely activated, and walked around the space, could look at objects. And I thought, you know what, I quite like that too. But being a teacher, having the experience I've got lots of health and safety kind of lights flashing in my head, and I'm thinking, the kind of gallery it is, can I have that happening? So I thought I need a marriage of the two, really. But that gave me a way in to putting the show together and constructing it. There was stylistic visual references I wanted to make in the piece when I was putting the work together on the walls and I was thinking about the different objects I was putting on. And again, I was looking at a lot of Kabakov when I was putting the show together and planning it. And I really liked the sense of the narrative, the storytelling, because of the nature of Love and Loss and because of the stories that unfold as you walk around and look through the cabinets. I thought, I can't dismiss and ignore the narrative. I've got to kind of embrace that and do something with it. Beyond the Claes Oldenburg bed in the department store. So I looked at this, and this is called The Man Who Flew into Space from His Apartment, and it's a really interesting piece of work because Kabakov is a Russian artist, and he wanted to create this narrative piece that was very theatrical and where the viewer got a chance to kind of unravel the work and feel like they're part of it. And you can see clearly there's a direct link to the coat and the hat. But when I was looking at Kabakov's this particular piece, the idea was you would put on this garment and you would look through this window and see this whole installation and start engaging with it very actively, and you'd have to twist and look around. And I thought, when I'd seen this work, I thought I do want to kind of find a way to do that in the show, which is why the piece you can see on the wall over here has that sense of a portrait. I think Manchester Portrait in there was quite a nice idea of people coming and viewing the show and imagining they could put that hat and coat on. So, you know, there was a very clear connection there in terms of keeping the narrative going. I also wanted to, in the show, as well as looking at narrative, I wanted to find ways to think about mixing craft and concept, because I didn't want a show that was about paintings, but I also didn't want a show that was just about a brick on a wall, on a floor. I wanted it to be more accessible and more inclusive. And I'd looked at Joseph Bedier's work, and this particular piece is called Falsa Naturaleza, and he's a Cuban artist, and what I really liked was his mixed media installations that he does and he's really famous for, where he really explores his relationship with Cuba and being Cuban and historically what's happening there. But again, stylistically, it gave me another idea about a solution to combine the craft and the concept. And you can see this piece, he's done very kind of painterly gestures and techniques, but he combines them with very conceptual aspects. So you've got like a plinth here and it's got an object on it, and lots of his work does that. And it gave me a window to think, actually, I could probably explore these themes of first love, unconditional love, by combining traditional Western approaches to picture making with also conceptual pieces, which is what I've done here, you see. So again, the show's starting to take shape in my head, looking at the art, thinking about how I can present it, and really getting something that's going to sit comfortably and be balanced and have that good pitch that sometimes when you're trying to combine craft and concept you lose. I knew I wanted to do something ephemeral on the wall. I knew I wanted to get away from pictures, and there's only one picture actually in here, which is the portrait of myself and my mum, the only photograph of like a real representation of me and mum in the show, which is the only one that's framed at an eye line. Everything else is decentered and moved away from that. And I had an opportunity with both this picture and the one with the hands to put frame pictures up there, but as I say, I wanted to avoid that. So I started thinking, how do I do wall art? It isn't just about a mural, it's not about decoration, it's not about the architecture, it's about something else. And I went back to, you know, cave art, and I found these wonderful pictures, which I'm sure you've all seen, of these artists back in prehistory who really kind of wanted to show their sense of placement. And I've said here, cave art records human activity directly on the wall, and I thought that's a nice way, and it liberates me away from the frame and using the wall in that way. I love this tomb painting. It's from an Amarna period in Egyptian art, and it shows two of Akhenaten's daughters. He was the father of Tutankhamun, and it shows two of his daughters on a wall painting in a tomb, and one tenderly touching the other one. So when I was looking at this work, I thought, I like this sense of touch, I like the sense of being tactile, and I like the sense of the wall art. Hence, the picture here, Final Hours, the depiction ends up being this picture of hands on a wall. But I struggled with this because there's a permanency here. They're there forever. We can see those all the time. And I thought I wanted to move away from that. I wanted something that actually... Excuse me, little technical hitch here. That wasn't as permanent, because the nature of the show is love and loss. And in love, the whole show is about how we were loved, how we experience love with friends, lovers, family members, and then we lose them. And it was important for me, if there was work going on the walls as wall art, it was going to be lost at the end of the show. So it wasn't about creating something that's been there for 3,000 years. It was about actually getting in here, doing something on the walls, knowing when the next show comes in, it's going to be washed away and it's lost forever, and I can't reproduce it. So I went for the ephemeral, and I thought it was a nice touch, really, in terms of pulling this together and my reference in terms of wall art. And again, just an example of me working there. Craig was busy clicking away and taking lots of videos. And I actually did these two. What people don't realise is these two drawings were done twice, because the first time I did them, I wasn't happy with them, and I had a day to do them. So I was washing them down and repainting the walls, and then I wished I'd had a hairdryer so I could get them back on again. So as I was actually doing the work on the walls, I was going through this process of loving them, but losing them because they weren't right. And again, I'll document it when the show comes down, taking them away and removing them away, really. There was a cautionary note for me. I did want this idea of putting a bed in the show, but we've got a very famous bed in 1998 that gets lots of press, and I thought what I don't want is a direct reference to Emin, really, in her fantastic unmade bed. So I thought, how can I have a bed in it that actually does more than just be about myself? And I wanted the bed to be some kind of way to connect together the wall art, the conceptual pieces on the wall, all the other bits and bobs. And I actually thought, I'll have a bed that acts like a blank canvas. Because as a painter, when I started painting, I'm faced with a white canvas. I thought I'll have a white bed that does exactly the same. And then the bed will connect with each of the themes and pull it together. So to absolutely avoid an unmade bed and that kind of link, I put in this white, still, quiet, empty space that from wherever you stood in the installation, you could then make a connection with what was around it. So, for example, where Annie's sitting on the floor and you look across the bed and you see these two lovers embracing, you get a sense of a matrimonial bed. Where Andy stood and you look across the bed and you're looking at hands and sick bowls and hospital tubes, you get a sense of a hospital bed and a deathbed, and so on and so forth. So straight away, this bed pulled it together and added to the narrative that I was trying to create, and also give the viewer an opportunity to find a way into the bed as well, because most of us sleep on beds, unless you've got a bad back and then you're on the floor, but most of us sleep in beds. We make love in beds, we die in beds, and and when things go bad in our lives, we often go to bed to kind of take a bottle of wine, or I do it, and a book, and convalesce in the bed. So the bed was important, and it was a way to get away from Tracy Emin's fantastic but often publicised bed. Funnily enough, as a little aside, when this show came out, the day it was going live, the bed was back in the press because it had just gone back into the tape. So I was like, but anyway, that was the cautionary tale. So really, what I've presented there before I look at the works is the kind of the situation of how this installation occurred, and the kind of artist I was looking at, the themes behind installation work, and really the approaches I was going to undertake to get together a show that was consistent, and that actually both included the viewer, but also the people that are coming into this gallery from America got a chance to kind of experience maybe a different mode of art that they were used to. Some of the works then, Love and Loss started, this twinkle in my eye, with this painting here I'd done of my mum. This is before my mum, at this point, had quite advanced pancreatic cancer, which was developing into secondary lung cancer. She was quite poorly at this point, and I'd said, Mum, I'm always drawing, I'm always painting it. And I said, can I do this painting? And she was not great on the idea, but, if you do what your children want, don't you? So I did this painting, and she expected this, quite aesthetic, beautiful, romantic Victorian painting. And as it was unfolding, she was kind of getting a bit nervous, and she was like, well, why are my eyes closed, Richard? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And eventually, when I revealed it, bless her, she wasn't enamoured with it. And she understood it, but she didn't particularly like the picture. And it's funny because my family don't like it either. I've got a brother or sister, and most of my family members struggle with this painting. And they struggle with it for all the reasons I'm sure you can imagine. But for me, whilst it was an entry point into the show, it wasn't just the route I wanted to take. I just didn't want a show that was a memorial piece to my mum. But it did link in with some of other people that have kind of done memorial portraits, done pictures of the family. And you can see here Lucien Freud's very famous sketch of his mum when she, a day or two after she died. And this was, I think it was a BP portrait winner. Last Portrait of Mother 2009. So again, really powerful paintings to look at, and ones that kind of gave me an opportunity to kind of contextualise this painting. Moving on from that, I also did some drawings of my mum as she was kind of literally minutes from life, really, and which is one of the drawings on the back wall. And some of them I didn't put in the show because, there were limits, and some of the drawings, there was one particular drawing I was doing of Mum, and she could hear my pencil scratching away on the sketchbook, and she was, like I say, 20 minutes from life, and I could see my mum's face troubled by the sound. So I put the pencil down, and when I did, she'd settle. So I started sketching away again. And I got to a point where I thought, Mum, you're not actually enjoying this, and you're annoyed at that painting, so you're definitely annoyed that I'm drawing you as you're passing. So I didn't include that painting, just that drawing out of respect for my mum. But as artists, I think we all have to grab everything. And this show is about grabbing everything, grabbing this relationship, grabbing friendships, grabbing everything I could from my mum, which is kind of where I started with this. Moving on from Unconditional Love, First Love is this piece here. And it's the painter tumbles into love with a model, that's what it's called. Pastel on wall, and I did it obviously March 2015. Being 18, you fall head over heels in love every week. And I, at the time, was madly in love with Picasso, madly in love with, all the big superstars of art. And I wanted to do a piece in the show that actually showed that kind of immaturity about experiencing love, but also my relationship with art at the time. When you're very young, or at least when I was very young, you tend to work through your influences in quite a derivative style, quite a pastiche way, really. And there was a naivety in the drawing that I really wanted to keep. I didn't want to do something really sophisticated and turn it into, a very kind of representational image. I wanted it to be an impression. And I remember when I was young falling in love with this Chagall painting called The Birthday, which has got him and Bella, and he's tumbling into love with them, and he's celebrating a birthday. And this idea of moving the figure around, and the figure ignoring conventional Italian perspective and the room, and it's not about representation, directly influenced this, as did this wonderful Picasso. When I'd gone to London recently, I'd gone to see the Vollard Suite produced, and it was in the British Museum, a selection of it. And the Vollard Suite, if you don't know about it, is this series of prints that Picasso did, where it was about his relationship with the model, really. And I was quite keen to kind of look at this idea of how the artist puts the model on the print, puts whoever he works with on the print, the sitter, and the relationship explored there, and especially in the terms of love. So you can see here the bearded sculptor creating this image of the model, and you can see here the artist has been pulled away from his work of the model and tumbling into this kind of ocean of love and infatuation with the girl who's looking at him. So I quite like that relationship, and it was important that First Love felt like that. Moving on to Controlled Love, which is on the wall to the right with the scraps of pictures on the paintings on the floor and the smashed glass on the artwork. Again, this idea of, we've all had friendships that can end in conflict. We fall out with people all the time, and we never really deal with that. We think, oh, well, that person wasn't a very good friend, so what? And I've had a few instances in my personal life where I've had people who are very close to me, and for whatever reason, the friendships have moved on. And this particular one was quite a troubling friendship because lots of things were said, and it became, unfortunately, a relationship that was characterised by conflict. And it got me thinking about, where do artists explore conflict? Where do they explore personal relationships in that way? And I'd always remember when I was studying Nan Golding's great work that emerged at the time, very confessional, very much her as the subject, and dealing with these kind of subcultures that she was around, or made herself around, but also things that had happened in her life. And this one is called Nan 1 month after being battered. And she'd been beaten up by her boyfriend at the time, and it was a very difficult relationship she'd had. And she documented it, and it became quite a publicised image. And I quite like this idea of violence. And I thought, I want to show violence in the conflict, but without actually having images of myself, all broken up with a buster down, which actually didn't happen. So I would have been faking that. But it was a good start point. But I also thought, well, how long have people been doing this? Is this a very modern concern, this sense of confession? Is it a 21st century thing or a 20th century thing? And it's not, because when you go back into history, you do see lots of examples of where images have been created and then been deliberately destroyed as an act of violence, as an act of aggression, sometimes as an act of suppression. So I started looking at these fragments of wall paintings, and I quite like this idea of actually something very powerful and very valuable that adheres to all of the things that you expect them to adhere to in terms of artistic craft and all these bits and bobs, and then destroying them. And I'd looked at these Iraqi wall paintings, and I'd looked at some Egyptian carvings where the people have been defaced. And there's 2 canvas scraps on the floor which actually formed part of very large elaborate paintings, backgrounds, foregrounds, everything you'd expect framed, very accomplished paintings at the time, that when this French particular relationship broke up, they became discarded and they became something that actually moved away from being valuable on a wall and got to a point where, you know, they exist on the floor, and I think the piece is called Discarded, in the same way you can see here. But again, we put these things in a museum, and once they go into a museum, that relic then takes on another life. And I wanted to give these scraps of canvases and paintings another life beyond the one that you would expect them to go in the bin, and putting them in the position they were, where I descended them away from the wall and I had them traversing the skirting board, was just showing this kind of movement, this slide down, and how the nature of our work and the value of our work and the intention of our work shifts and moves and is very flexible as we kind of explore our practice. And then Unconditional, finally, I've got this this wall painting, this wall drawing of, and it's a wall drawing of me holding my mum's hand just before she died. And again, you know, my sister at the time tutted, because as I'm holding my mum's hand, she heard my camera phone click. She said, "What are you doing?" You know. And I said, "Well, I can't not do it. I need to grab it. It's, you know, it's my mum. She's important to me, and I need everything because she's going to be gone shortly." So I did this photo of this holding her hands, and it went with all the other drawings, but I wanted to make it large, so it wasn't just about a little discarded snapshot that you take quickly and throw away, and you lessen the value of it. So it was important to put it large, important to elevate it, as I did with her cup, which is directly behind Mark, by putting it on a plinth and making it strong. But I'd also looked at some paintings, some of Rembrandt's extraordinary paintings of love and tenderness, and this beautiful painting by Munch, which was The Sick Child, and these depictions of unconditional love, where you get absolutely nothing but love without any conditions, any constraints. And this particular painting by Rembrandt, I love the fact that the son who's come back has got a bare foot, he's got one shoe on, one shoe off, he's had a hard life. You can't see it very well here, but when you see this painting, and I did see this painting when I was in Amsterdam, it was on loan, and you've got these two hands, and when you see it in real life, there's a really big masculine hand, and then a very small feminine hand, which doesn't translate very well on screen. And I got this sense of, you know, the mother, the father will always accept back the child. There's a Kate Bush line in one of her songs, "The mother loves the murderer," you know. And I wanted this sense of a piece of work that actually conveyed, without question, what it's like to experience unconditional love. So again, the influences here around the Rembrandt and the sick child, with Munch clearly because of the bed and my mum being ill at the time. So what you've got there is you've got a presentation of two parts. You've got the kind of the situation behind the show, why it's the installation, who I'd been looking at, and why I decided to put this kind of crafting and concept together, and also some of the works that were in there. There is online content. When you walk around the show, there are these QR codes that you can scan with a QR reader, and they take you to a website that I've developed, which explore and expand this show beyond the walls of this gallery. And again, this idea of using very modern mediums. When you go on there, there's songs, there's books, there's all sorts that link to the themes. So please feel free before you go today to scan and have a look what's there. There's also a direct link to the website there. And that's it really. That's my presentation of Love and Loss, how he got here, what it's about, and how the work kind of fits together. I'm happy to take any questions if you've listened to that and there's anything that you're not sure about, you just want a bit more elaboration on it. Thank you. What I didn't want to do with this show is take it lock, stock and barrel to another venue, really, because it was very much a show that was created knowing what the space was and knowing what I had available to me, and thinking very much about the audience that walks in the door in Redcar. Also, my mum used to take me fishing in Redcar when I was very young before I left, so there was a big connection with the sea here and a big connection with the space. If I had to take this somewhere else, I'd look to be kind of developing the themes a little bit more, but I'd be looking to do it in a more of a collaborative way. Because for me, the most important thing about this show was the psychological contract that you brought to it, where you fit into this. And for me to develop this beyond would be to say to other artists, other practitioners, you know, how can we make this show so that I can minimise a little bit some of the more autobiographical confessional parts and actually open up the theme in a much more broader way, really. And I think that's where I'd like to take it next, if I do indeed carry on with Love and Loss. Good question, thank you.